Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar today. We're excited to have John Grant and Jenny Hollingsworth with us from Innovia. And John and Jenny will be continuing their Business Central for Manufacturing 101, and they are going to be focusing on planning worksheet tips, tricks, and best practices. And before I pass it over to them, I just want to let you know that we are recording this session and it will be posted to our on-demand webinar library for you to review and share with anyone. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box, and we're going to get them answered as the presentation goes along, so that way the flow is a lot easier. All right, so now I'm going to pass it on over to Jenny to kick off our presentation.
All right, thanks, Angie. All right, as Angie said, we're going to talk about planning worksheet today, tips, tricks, and best practices, part of our webinar series on manufacturing. If you don't know me, I am Jenny Hollingsworth. I'm a senior application consultant here at Innovia. Been working here October, I think it'll be 15 years. And prior to that, I was at another NAV partner for about 10 years. So working with NAV for about 25 years since it first became a Windows product, and have watched it go through its many stages and seen how it improves every version. So I'll let John Grant introduce himself.
Oh, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everybody. I've been here since, I don't know, probably 7:30 I came in today. So,
Oh, geez.
I too am a senior app and been with Innovia for 10 plus years, and have had a chance to work on other ERP products as well as BC. And I'm a lean proponent. If you don't know me, I do like to leverage lean concepts in implementations. I'm sold on that. If anybody has been exposed to it, it's a real solid way to leverage the two together. And looking forward to sharing some real world experience that we've had with the planning for this presentation.
All right, thanks, John. So our agenda today, we're going to go through anything regarding planning worksheet. So some of the basics, functions, some of the extras that are out there, and then maybe some reports and different screens and analysis views that might be useful to you. All right, so let's look at the basics. So John, why don't you tell us what the planning worksheet is?
Yeah, we'd like you to start off with what is planning? What is the planning worksheet / requisition worksheet some customers run? But if you're running production and assembly orders, you will be running the planning worksheet versus the requisition worksheet. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's simply a tool. It's an attempt to go out, plan your material when I need to buy it based on everything it knows. It looks at all purchase orders, sales orders, transfer orders, production orders, inventory. A lot of the data is set up so we can plan when we need to purchase with lead times. We'll help schedule production orders as well as assembly orders and take care of the purchasing. So those three things. And think of it as, without this tool, you're doing it anyway. You're accumulating data, and this tool jumpstarts that. So you just use the data to accumulate it, and you leverage, well, why did it tell me to do this? Versus, oh, I'm planning this item, I better go check what's in the system before I start. And there's two major components to the planning engine. One called MPS for short, and MRP, and we'll go into a little bit of detail on those. MPS, think of it as independent demand items, finished product that you get a sales order, you might have a forecast, you might have a transfer. And the dependent demand, which is really the MRP side of the world, is, oh, because I've got a finished product that a customer wants, here's the bill of material. That's considered dependent demand based on the independent demand of the top level item. We'll talk a lot about that as we get into it. And again, any questions at any time, I think it helps everybody on the call, because if you think of something at that moment, just bring it up and we'll do our best to answer it.
let's look at the functions that are available in the planning worksheet.
Okay, if we go through, I'm the planner. Couple of things. There's a in the planning worksheet, calculate regenerative plan it's called, and think of this as might run this once a night, might run it first thing in the morning, depending on your business what works best. And it can go through and calculate all items, all purchased, assembly, production order items, and generates a worksheet with all the items populated with messages and recommended. But again, it doesn't do anything automatically. It doesn't create POs, production orders automatically. You as the planner or the purchaser get a chance to review it. You can delete it, change it, do whatever you need. And that's, again, it's an attempt to give you the data that you then make decisions on versus you having to pull the data out and then make the decisions. Part two of this is there's something called a calculate net change. And just think about this is could be part of your process. And what I mean by that is typically in the planning worksheet flow, it's generated at night. Let's just pick on that method. And the first people in the morning are your production planners. So they're reviewing suggested production orders, maybe assembly orders. They're understanding quantities, dates. They're releasing it to the, they're saying, oh, I like this one. Yep, let's create a firm plant production order. This one, this one, this one. And before I let purchasing in, I may need to run the net change. And why would you need to run that? If in the purchase or the production side of it, our planners they're not just executing what the system tells them to do. They're using their experience to change quantities or delete a line even. It's I'm going to make 100 of these. No, I don't want to do that. Not today, maybe tomorrow. I'm deleting that line. And those changes need to be reflected in the purchase before I give it to purchasing. Because if I have a demand for 100 of a finished product, and there's a component we need to buy, it's going to have in that worksheet, oh, you need to buy 100 of these components, and here's the due date. Well, if I delete that line out of my planning worksheet, now I'm out of sync. My purchasing demand is out of sync with my production demand. And there's something called a calculate net change, and that's a simple thing to do. So I'm the production guy. I released all the orders. I'm done. I run a net change, send an email, or let purchasing know, have at it. And usually this is like you want first thing in the morning, production's in. They're maybe done at 8 o'clock in the morning. They send an email to purchasing, go for it. They're done by 9 o'clock or something like that. You try and get a window of that I can't go in until production's done, and then look for that email. Or it's a process flow more than anything. But the net change can help if your production and assembly type recommendations are being tweaked or adjusted before you accept what's on the planning worksheet. So it can be a good tool. And we'll show that a little bit, I think. Okay, then part of what happens in the planning worksheet, and we'll show an example of this, is you do get, it does say create a new production order, create a new purchase order. You can have several different change. You can change date, change quantity, change both date and quantity. It can tell you to cancel. And all of these type activities are based on how you set up your item. So there are replenishment and planning parameters on the item record or the stock keeping unit record if you have multiple locations. That will come into play when I run the planning worksheet. We'll show you some of those as we get further along. So all those things will be presented to you. None of it happens automatically. It's just based on what the system knows. An example would be I have a purchase order in the system for an item, and for some reason the demand got canceled and that purchase order did not get cleaned up. You would see the next day that it might say cancel this PO because I have no demand in the system for it. If that didn't get deleted already, if the process broke down. So all good stuff.
All right, some of the things that can affect the results in the planning worksheet are your reordering policies. So the setup on your planning fast tab of your item card. Demand forecasts, that is what it's the new name in Business Central. If you're in Nav, that's production forecast, so same thing. Then we have low level code, which is required for correct planning. And then we have the setting of dampeners, which is also optional functionality in Nav or BC. In our prior webinars, we went through the reordering policies and demand forecast, but we'll touch on both the low level code and those dampeners in this webinar.
Okay, so let's talk about this low level code. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. Typically, in most organizations, in the manufacturing setup, there is a, in the yellow there, you see dynamic low level code. And that's usually set to yes, meaning you don't worry about it. It just happens. Now, where it happens is when you certify a bill of material. So when you certify a bill of material, it's updating the item record for all the components, and it's kind of a value, what's the lowest level of this component is used at. I think it starts at 0 and then it goes to 1, 2, 3. So if your bill of materials go 3 levels deep, a component could be at level 2 because 0 is the lowest, I think. And how that's used, it's required for planning, because planning starts at the lowest level and goes up. I don't know if you ever noticed, if you're running planning today, it kind of flashes, you're at level, it goes from highest to lowest, like, I have to look again. But you'll see 1, 2, 3. That's what that low level code is talking about. If I get, when would you ever turn this off? Because it is a parameter. And the only time I've ever seen it turned off is if you are using versions of the bill of material. And when you go to certified, you hit that button and it takes a minute. It takes, I don't know, 45 seconds, 2 minutes. It's super slow. And what it's doing then is updating the low level codes, all these different versions. It tries to keep all that in sync. So we have a few customers who use versioning and it's slow, so they turn that off, which you can do. But then you have to be cognizant of when I run the planning worksheet, I need to do it manually. There's a calculate low level code choice that we're showing here. Or if I'm a coster and I'm rolling up at standard, or even FIFO, I can roll up at FIFO. You want that to be updated before you would do that, or you might have inaccurate data. So I'd say 90% or more of our customers just have it marked and you don't have to worry about it. So just so you know what that is, that low level code. Oh, and I have a trivia question if anybody knows. This is used, obviously, is keeping track of what level the item is used at. Does anybody know how many levels you can have in the bill of material? Anybody gotten an error? In a test company, you can get the error if you create a bill of material attached to an item, but in the bill of material is the item you attached it to, which is called a circular bill. Because you will eventually, you can't certify it because it will give you 50 levels exceeded. But if you have a 50 level deep bill of material, we might want to talk. That's pretty extreme. But 50 levels is what it goes to.
I was going to guess, John, but I knew the answer.
Yeah, well, I've had that error happen with customers because they call out the same item in the bill that they attach it, they try and attach it to. And that's called a circular bill. Of interest, if you need to, a finished item, need to rework it, which does happen, you can still do a circular bill, but you need to do it in the production order. You can't create a production order and have a bill that's certified if it's circular. But I can create my production order and add that item to my bill if I'm reworking it. I don't know, adjusting something or whatever, I'm not sure, on a finished product. You can, but it's only in the production order file, not in the, your bill of material that you use over and over and over.
All right. All right, let's take a look of some extras that you can use with the planning worksheet. So maybe, John, you could describe what the dampeners are.
Okay, dampeners start coming into play, and I encourage you to set up your system and understand how planning works without dampeners initially. These are used to help with what they call noise in a planning worksheet. We'll show you a sample of a planning worksheet with lots of messages and whatnot. And some of these dampeners can help with that. For instance, I might want a dampener to say, I have a sales order for 100 parts. So I cut my production order for 100. And then the sales order might get changed to 99 or something. Do I really want to change my production order to 99? I might have a tolerance there that if we're within some percentage, I'm still going to run my production order. Or on the PO side, if I'm, do I want a message in the planning worksheet if it was supposed to come in, like say today in a dent, and tomorrow do I want a message, or do I give it a 1-day buffer or 2 days, things like that. So these dampeners can help with, if I'm off by 1 or 2 days, maybe I don't want a message in the planning worksheet, or if my quantities are within a tolerance, I don't want a message in the planning worksheet. So I'd encourage you to, if you're new to this or getting into it, learn how the planning works, and realize that you do have dampeners we could apply. But I would do those after you're comfortable with the results. And I get how it's doing this. Yep. So just that's what I've seen works well with trying to use dampeners rather than trying to set them up right away. Let's get you comfortable with what it does first.
All right. All right, so that was just an overview of how the planning worksheet works. But why don't we move over into Business Central and take a look at some of the functions and see how it operates. All right, let me refresh my database here.
You got it.
All right, okay, so let's go to worksheets. I'm gonna open the planning worksheet. All right, so the first thing we wanna do is prepare the worksheet and calculate the regenerative plan. So let's look at those options first. All right, our first two options ask us whether we want to calculate MPS and MRP, either or both. So, John, I know MPS is bringing in the demand for the finished goods. MRP brings in the demand for the raw materials, which could be for the finished goods we're making. But what do you see? What's the norm? Do people usually keep both of those turned on when they run their first regen?
Yeah, I would say 75% of the people run both. They want to see all the production orders and the purchasing to support what's out there together. But they do use the net change in their process. They'll, like I mentioned, the production people will be in first, launch the orders, delete orders, change dates, change quantities, run the net change, turn it over to purchasing, and everything's in sync. I only have one customer who runs MPS like one night and then MRP the next night. In their process, that's what they do. And the extreme I have a customer that they have 6 locations, I think, and every night they run 70 planning worksheets, if you can get your head around that. And that gets into somewhat of a strategy on, if you have a transfer item from another location, you need to have that created before you run planning at the location and So there's some sequencing that's involved in how those are ran. But yeah, they run 70 planning worksheets to every night, and they're broken apart into different categories, I believe. And one rule to remember is one part number, whether it's purchase, assembly, production, can only end up in one worksheet. So if Jenny ran a planning worksheet and I ran it after, and my overlap happened to be some of the same parts that were in her planning worksheet, they would actually disappear out of her planning worksheet and end up in mine. So you can't have two planning worksheets with the same item by default, which I guess just makes sense.
All right, thanks. I'll leave both on for now. And then we have our starting and ending dates. So with my data in this company, I'm gonna put, let's just pretend today's date is October 1st. That's the date I wanna use. But John, one of the questions that came in was, what should the starting date be, today's date or a date in the past? And how does this affect past due orders?
Yeah, and I think they're asking one of the key questions. I usually recommend today, you enter today, starting today, or like if it was ran at night, it would be that night. And then out, I don't know, maybe you're looking out 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. And that's kind of the default. But if you, again, if the dates need work, because obviously these systems, and I don't care which ERP system you're working on, if you don't have accurate inventory and accurate dates, you have to fight those constantly. But an example, and that I'm reading into that question, but I think it's legitimate. When BC/NAV picks up an item that is past due, whether it's a sales order or a transfer or a production order, component demand, it puts it in a bucket past due, and it doesn't give us any more data than that, right? So I see an could be an attention or emergency. I need to order 100 today. It's just telling the planner, you got a problem, and the only data it knows is today. What do you do? Couple things there, and we're going to go through the planning or availability, item availability by event, and you'll see that's one way to look at. Oh man, these are if I do the order, I look at why is it on. We'll go through that. Why is it telling me this? It says it's negative inventory. Well, that doesn't tell me what orders or why, but item availability by event will show that. We'll kind of get into that. So what date would I use? I'd use today's date. If you backdate it, that might accomplish the same thing as item availability, but I really don't want any dates backward. That might be more of a, man, I got a lot of activity that's showing this emergency or attention with bad dates. What's the fastest way to see those? And if you got a ton of them, you could take the starting date and put it back 3 months, run it, and now you've got dates of sales orders that are demand past due. And that's just a technique, maybe to help you troubleshoot. But usually recommend just today's date and then go forward what's reasonable. If you have some long lead time items, that might be a separate run. This might be my production. Get this all done, out the door. And purchasing might on Mondays go, I want to look at any super long lead time items we have in our forecast maybe. So I might run out 6 months just to look at that. So you can do different things here, but the normal one I feel would be the starting date, how many weeks out, and let it run.
All right, awesome, thank you. Next field, stop and show first error. If you turn that on, if the planning worksheet generates errors, it will stop and show you every error one by one. If you leave this off, any errors it might come up with will show us at the end. So I'm gonna leave that off. Demand forecasts. If you're using demand forecasts, either the sales forecast or the component forecast, and you want to have that affect your planning worksheet run, you can select your forecast here. And then also you can optionally exclude the forecast before a certain date. And what date do you normally recommend, John, for excluding the forecast?
Yeah, if you're using forecasts like today's, I would exclude this week that I'm working on. So any planning ran this week, I'd probably ignore the forecast. I would start the forecast next Monday. I think it also is a Monday through a Sunday. So I would put in there whatever Monday's date is forward. Versus this week is kind of underway. It's Wednesday already. I don't really want. I can't react. I don't want that in my planning. I would just leap forward to the next week.
Okay, I'm going to leave it wide open just so I know what data I'm going to get when I calculate this worksheet. And then the final option here is respect planning parameters for exception wordings. And what's your default, John? Do you like to leave that on or leave that off?
Yeah, I would leave this on because this is then going to recognize your order multiples, your minimum order, all those kind of things you've set up, versus saying, hey, you need to buy we got an emergency order for 17. It's going to come up, we got an emergency order for 50 because my order multiple, my order quantity is 50. And typically those are set up because that's what it's either a carton or it's some quantity that you've determined for that vendor. Either it's the best price or some minimum order, and I'd want that reflected in what it's recommending me to buy right away versus me having to figure that out after I review the data. So I'd always mark that. Yeah.
And then finally, you can set filters on from your item. So location filters, type of item filters, whatever you want. I'm going to select location Wisconsin and just filter on my Wisconsin location. You could even do a filter on replenishment system and bring in just production order parts or just purchase parts. So it's pretty flexible. It's up to you what type of filters you want to set. I'll go ahead and click OK. And let's let that run for a second here. So it's going through and calculating everything to populate the worksheet. And it will recommend to us production orders to process and purchase orders to place. It also recommends assembly orders and transfer orders as well. I don't have those set up in my database, but those are also options that will be recommendations in the planning worksheet.
You know, that low level code is on the screen. I think it starts at the top and goes down. Yeah.
All right. I do have one item I'm having issues with, so warns me at the end. Calendar issue I need to fix. So I'll go ahead and click close on that. And populates my worksheet. So maybe, John, if you could explain some of the pertinent fields in the worksheet, and then maybe start going through maybe how a planner would use it.
Yeah, and this is pretty typical. It's in item number order. And you could filter this. You could sort it by start date if you wanted to or whatever. But let's leave it the way it is. And as a planner, I would come into this, and what I would do is start working with, let's say I'm the production order, like I mentioned first. So I would actually filter to production orders, because that's really all I want to work with. I don't really care about the purchase at this time. That's a replenish. Right? So now I'm in this compact view, and I would start working on my orders, and I'd kind of work my way down. If I look at what fields show on here, yeah, the item number, action, new, cancel, a bunch of news. It's automatically checked that's accept action message, which is hard to say fast 10 times, but it won't be checked if there's an issue with the date, for instance, or something's not quite right. But if there's no issues, it will automatically mark it. And then, of course, we've got the due date, which comes from potentially from the sales order, which is the shipment date on a sales order line, or a transfer might be there too. If it's a production order, which I'm looking at, it has the start date and time and end date and time for me. I go across. This is a new one, so it's not like the second line you know, there's no original quantity. It's just here's what it wants me to do. There's the quantity. Showing the default routing and BOM. Now, as a planner, I can actually change the production order here if I wanted to. So if I'm working that first line, I could actually override, or any lines, override the routing that it brought in. And you simply can change it here. You just have to remember to refresh that one line. It's kind of like refreshing a production order. And where you see that then is, yep, we can just take all of you. Let's see if we can just look at that once.
I was just going to
Yeah, take the.
Okay. There we go.
So what we actually did there is, if you look, as you can see, the bill of material and the routing that were pulled in, it's just like a production order. If you're familiar with production, I can look at the routing. So we actually overrode and brought in a new routing. Let's say that I, as a planner, know that line 1 has got some issues, so I just grab the alternate routing for line, go to line 2, even though it's slower, and I can do it right in the planning worksheet and create the production order correctly versus taking the defaults, line 1, creating a production order, then going over the production order and changing the routing and refreshing. So you have those kind of options in here, as well as you can actually change a bill or a route directly. You could delete an item and substitute an item. You could, maybe it's scheduled to the work center, and now we're going to select the machine inside the work center. I could do it here, change it to a machine and select the machine. You can do those kind of things before you create the production order. Now, would you do that? Well, I've got some planners who get pretty savvy at this, and they know, I'll call it tribal knowledge, that, gee, I know that line 1 is going to have maintenance next week, Monday. This order is going to run in that. I'm going to move it right away, just to help that process. So you have a lot of tools, even as a planner, for production right here. You can even add a new line here if you wanted to. You can add a manual one. As long as you refresh it, it'll pull in the bill and the route, and I can carry out action message and create the production order.
All right, and I'm gonna do that on this one. So if we scroll to the left here, so if I go ahead and carry out the action message, anything that says accept action message will be carried out. I'll go ahead and carry out the action message for the production orders. Your only options here are to create a planned or a firm planned production order. And we'll select firm planned. Click OK. All right, so those production orders were now created, and what I have left in my planning worksheet here is the ones where I did not check mark accept action message. And I'm still filtered by production order as well. So if I take that filter off, I'll see all my lines again.
Yeah, so another thing we'd be doing here, let's just, maybe we'll do it on a purchase side, but production is the same thing. Let's say, why is it telling me to order it or make it? There's two areas to go into. So any one of these lines, it doesn't matter which one. Okay. The first thing I would do is what was it, the order?
Order tracking?
Order tracking, yep. So it's saying I need 4,645. Why is it telling me I need that? Okay, now it might pop up and say there's nothing, but if I click on the green 4565, I've got an emergency order, so if we make this bigger, just to see what, there's a total message, right? Okay. Okay, this it sounds like some people have gotten this where it's not enough information. I don't know why we're going negative, right? So, okay, so we're negative. So now what I want to do is find out why are we negative. So we can close this and we can run item availability for this production order item by event is a good one to run. And this is trying to answer that question of why is it telling me to order it? If you blow this up, it's like a pegging report, and in some ERP systems it's called a pegging report, but all it is by location. We can do it by day, by week, particular location, up in the header, and it's going day by day. So my beginning inventory is what, 395. I've got a on 310, I've got a component demand, I've got a sales order, I've got a production order. So it's showing you and the balance as it goes along. So I don't remember, what is our system date? Do you know? What's our system date?
I think today's date is our system date.
Okay. So if you notice, we've got from 2018, we've got demand that's making up our past due. And I think by the time we're done here, we're negative 4645 in all, I think. Is that correct?
Yep.
Was that our number that was on the planning worksheet, 4645?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's where that came from. So this item availability by event is a really strong report. The other thing you can do is actually go look at the sales order, for instance, like the target sales order. You can, from this screen, go look at it. And see the details on it. And depending on the process you're doing, it might be you add a note to this to say, hey, this is way past due. What do you want me to do? Blah, 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 those kind of things. And then when you close this, you're right back into the item availability. So this supports that when I have a negative, all it's saying is I'm ordering negative 40, whatever it was, and there's really no detail in the order tracking. But if I go to item availability by event, I can see how it came up with that number. And the other thing you might want to show is the fact box on this guy, which we'll show you the setup. So we've got this is a lot for lot item, 7 days. We don't have any like order multiples or minimum order quantity set up, but other items you would, and you're trying to want, well, where's that number coming from? It might be a combination of how you have it set up plus the event data. Okay, so if we did all our, we'll just show you the. I don't think we run. Do we run the net change? We probably don't, right? We'll just show where it is, I guess.
I think no, we can run it now, because if we made any changes to production orders, we would do a net change, right?
Yeah, let's say we delete those 4 then. We're not going to do those. I'm the planner, and yeah, I know it told me to do all this, but I'm not doing any of it. Not today. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. It'll come back tomorrow if it still needs to be. So we can delete 4 lines off of here. I think if you do those 3 dots, I think it does.
Well, yeah, I know it's not. Yeah, not sure why.
So as a planner, I said, nah, these 4 orders. Okay, so I'm done with production, right? All that's left in this is purchasing. But because I've changed, I've deleted, I want to make sure the purchasing data is correct before I give it to them. There's something called a net change.
So under the actions, we'll go to functions, calculate net change.
And we'll take the defaults, but some customers just do purchased items, but it won't run long. We'll just do everything. Well, yeah, whatever. Okay, those 4 might come back then, but that's okay. You get the concept. Is you want your purchase data within this planning worksheet to marry up to what the planner just did. That's why I recommend planners in first, launch your production orders, run the net change if your process is kind of volatile or you're changing quantities, dates. Run that. It's done. Send an email. Have at it in purchasing. If you notice, our 4 orders came back because we ran it wide open again. If we would have just had purchased items, it would have cleaned up the purchase items to marry up to that. And then as a purchasing, a couple of tidbits. If I filter on a vendor, any one of these vendors, and I carry out action message on all 4 or 5 lines, it'll put it on one PO. If anybody had a question on that. So if I say pick both of these lines, one's an emergency and one's a, it will put them both on one PO. And yeah, if we carry on, and we could go look at it if you want.
And it does give you options for purchase orders as well. You can just make the purchase orders automatically, or you can choose to send them all to the requisition worksheet. Maybe the planner works in the planning worksheet, the purchaser works in the RUC worksheet. You can choose to do it that way as well. We'll just make the purchase orders and go look at that. All right, it's this last one here.
And both
And
lines.
you'll know, yeah, both lines are showing with their quantities, and the expected receipt date is then the due date from the planning worksheet.
If we go back to the planning worksheet, that's just there's a little subtle thing there that just to point out. I'm in the planning worksheet and I've got all these purchase items, right? And some of them are marked to carry out action message right away. So if I would say, pick any one of these lines and highlight it and say carry out, it's going to do all 12, 15 that are marked. So the correct way to do that is filter on the item or filter on the vendor or something. It condenses the screen, and when you carry out action message, it only does what's in that filtered view. Because if you notice, we did our 2 lines, carried it out. It still left the other 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines as marked, but it didn't create the POs yet. So that allows the purchaser to focus on a vendor, typically get it all square, cut the PO, then come back to what's left and just methodically work your way down, changing, deleting, those kind of things. So maybe the 2 takeaways are tools to understand why is it telling me to do it, which is order tracking, or item availability by event, which allows you to even drill into production orders, sales orders, etc. And then the filtering technique to allow you to focus on a vendor, for instance, is probably more logical to do a vendor. And then whatever in that window, and I mark, it will create the PO, and then I come back and just methodically work my way through. One note too is you really want these planning worksheets cleaned up by a certain time in the morning. I don't know, so they're using it right now. An example, we have got a production order recommendation to change the quantity or date sitting in my planning worksheet. I'm over in production and I want to release that production order. It won't let me because it knows there's an action message, something in the planning worksheet that will prevent you from releasing that production order. If you've ever seen that, but those of you that are using it might have. That's why it wants you to address that message before. Now, the answer might be, I'm just going to delete that message because we're releasing the production order, but it doesn't want to have an entry in there. So you don't want to leave entries in here day after day after day. You want to clean it up, even, let it build. Now, planning will replace everything's in here, but you can put a manual demand in here too, if you wanted to. A manual PO, I could enter a little bit of information, create the PO, same with the production order. So there's some flexibility hidden in here that if you're creating a bunch of POs manually or production orders manually, it might be faster to do it from the planning worksheet. It's pretty simple. May or may not support what you're doing.
All right. So let's look at, are there any useful reports with production? One of the ones John likes is the planning availability. John, is this similar to the item availability by event?
Yeah, if you wanted to print out, now the drawback on this one, it doesn't ask you for location. So if you're multi-location, but if you're one location, it's really a printout of that item availability. Not as much flexibility, obviously a printout, I can't drill to the record, but it might be, again, it's just trying to keep a running total of requirement, receipt, balance, out a number of weeks or months. Again, it's just, if you need to print it to review it, I think that item availability is a stronger way to look at things. And I guess you could send that to a Excel or Word doc also, but this isn't a system. Just want to point that out. It's not, this is not a report off of the planning worksheet. It's a separate report. Not sure why it wouldn't be on there, but we've had requests sometimes to, or I think it's a lot easier now to add it to your ribbon in case you want to print it.
All right. Any questions that people have on planning worksheet at all?
And if you're not using it, I'd encourage you to pick like 10, 20 items that you set up in a test environment and start understanding how it works and that kind of thing. Because I can honestly say we've had good success with customers making this work. But the key is to understand a control group of items versus, hey, we got 5,000 items. I'm just going to rapid start or update all of them, and then you run a planning worksheet and it's overwhelming and you kind of get lost in the mass data. So there's some strategy on how to make sure that it's working the way you want it to, and that's why I recommend a control group of items and even some long lead time items, because you might want to put those in a component forecast. So at least if I'm the purchasing person on a Monday, I run my planning out 6 months, try and pick up those long lead time items in the forecast, just to have visibility. I might still not create a PO, but that's one technique you could use to be on top of those, because by the time you need them, it's too late sometimes because you don't have demand soon enough ahead of 6 months.
All right. Anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact us. I have John Grant's information up here, our resident planning expert. So I would talk to him over me on planning, but so feel free to contact John if you have any further questions. Also, one of our upcoming webinars in our manufacturing series is next week. BC does subcontracting too. So if you're a subcontractor and want to learn a little bit more about that, feel free to join that next week. And I will turn it back over to Angie.
All right. Thank you, John and Jenny, for presenting today. And to everyone on today's webinar, or if you're watching on demand, we thank you for joining us. We do have a few more webinars coming soon. Tomorrow, we have Mitch Brown from Data Haven presenting on Ever Ask Yourself, Where's the File? Well, here's your answer. And John and Jenny will be back, as she said, next Tuesday, continuing their series on BC does subcontracting too. So check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and it's innovia.com/events. We're always updating our webinars section of our website, so be checking that out for new ones that are being posted. And if you haven't heard of it already, we have a podcast that is going on. It's called the Innovia Conversation, and we want to encourage you to listen to our selection that Steve Waltz and Jeff Progolski have provided to us over the past year and a half. And you can find out about all the different podcast platforms to listen to on our podcast page, and that's innovia.com/podcast. So check out our selection and subscribe so you'll be notified when our new episodes air. And they did do a new podcast with our founder and chairman, Donovan Lane. So check that podcast out. And Innovia Consulting is proud to be a platinum sponsor of Community Summit, which is coming up October 6th to the 9th in Nashville, Tennessee. Hopefully we will be in person. Summit is the annual gathering for all Microsoft Dynamic Nav and Business Central users and supporters. And this event is full of great sessions to help develop leadership skills, improve Nav VC skills, and learn how to get more from the investment our companies have made in the tool we use to run our businesses every day. So check out our conference page, and that's innovia.com/conferences for more details and to save on your summit registration. All right, thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on another Innovia webinar. Have a great day, everyone.